When we think of ancient Egypt, we picture pyramids, right? These giant monuments of stone. But what if the greatest monument wasn't a building at all? What if it was a human face? Today, we're going to dig into a pretty radical idea, that the line of the pharaohs, well, it never actually ended.
Yeah, this is a huge question of identity, one that goes back thousands and thousands of years. Our guide for this journey is a really important 1955 lecture by a historian named Kamel Mikhail Abdel Sayed, and he poses a pretty stunning question. Are the Coptic people of today the direct descendants of the ancient pharaohs?
So, where do we even start? Well, our whole investigation kicks off with just a single word, a word that might hold the first big clue to this ancient connection. And that word is Copt.
Now, you might have heard that the name Copt comes from a small town in Egypt called Kift. That's the common story. But the real story, the one history actually backs up, it goes way, way further back. And it tells us something absolutely fundamental about Egyptian identity itself.
Okay, so follow the breadcrumbs here. It all starts with the ancient name for the capital city, Memphis. The Egyptians called it Haiku Ptah. Now, Greek traders come along, they hear this, and you know how languages work. They kind of adapted it into something they could pronounce, Egyptos. Pretty soon, they weren't just calling the city that, they were calling the whole country Egyptos. Fast forward a few centuries, the Arabs arrive, and that Greek Egyptos morphs into the Arabic Quip.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's huge. The word Copt wasn't about religion. It wasn't about a specific town. It's a direct, unbroken linguistic line from the ancient name for the country itself. Being a Copt originally just meant being Egyptian. Period.
Okay, that's a pretty strong linguistic link. But it immediately brings up a huge question, right? If the name connects them, what about all those invasions Egypt went through over the millennia?
And this is the big counter-argument you always hear. You've got Persians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs. Egypt was basically the crossroads of the ancient world. Surely all that conquest must have completely changed the people, diluted that original Pharaonic bloodline. It just makes sense, right? Well, maybe not. The source material we're looking at argues that even though empires rose and fell, the actual Egyptian people, the population on the ground, stayed remarkably the same.
The argument uses this fantastic metaphor to explain it. Picture the Egyptian people as this vast, deep ocean. It's been there for over 7,000 years, just existing. Now, think of all those invaders as little streams, or maybe even just trickles flowing into this ocean. Sure, they might cause a few ripples on the surface, but they're not going to change the ocean itself. They just get absorbed.
And look, we've got the numbers to back this up. Take the Arab conquest in the 7th century. Estimates put the Egyptian population at something like 18 million people. 18 million! The invading army, at its absolute peak, maybe 20,000 soldiers? I mean, do the math. That's not even a drop in the bucket. It is a tiny, tiny fraction of 1%.
And this is where that quote just hits the nail on the head. They weren't replaced. The invaders were, quote, swallowed by the Egyptian sea. They were simply absorbed, assimilated into this massive existing culture over time.
Okay, so we have language, we have demographics, but that's all a bit abstract, isn't it? The source argues that the most powerful evidence, the most compelling proof, is something you can literally see for yourself. And this is where we turn to the testimony of the stones and the words of a true legend in the field.
So let's call our expert witness to the stand, Gaston Maspero. This guy was an absolute giant of Egyptology. And way back in 1908, he gave this public lecture where he addressed this exact question. But he didn't come at it from a political or religious place. No, he approached it as a scientist, just looking at the hard evidence, the faces carved in stone thousands of years ago.
And his argument was so simple, so direct. He basically told his audience, don't just take my word for it. Go to the museum. Look for yourself. He was convinced that the faces you see on the statues of pharaohs, scribes, and priests, they're the same faces you'll see on the people walking down the street in Cairo today. The resemblance, he said, was just undeniable. And there's one story, one incredible discovery that just captures this perfectly. It involves a 4,600-year-old wooden statue, pulled from the sands of Saqqara.
So the story goes like this. The excavation team is carefully brushing the sand away from this ancient statue. And as the head starts to emerge from the dirt, the local Egyptian foreman, one of the diggers, just stops dead in his tracks. He looks at this ancient face and he shouts out to the crew, "That's our village chief! It looks exactly like him!"
Can you imagine that? The resemblance was so spot on.
So uncanny that the statue got its nickname right then and there. To this day, it's known as Sheikh el-Balad, which just means the village chief. I mean, in that one moment, you have a living, breathing connection that just jumps across almost 5,000 years of history.
So, we've got language, we've got population numbers, we've got this incredible physical resemblance. Where does this all lead? What's the final verdict from the historical sources we're examining?
While Maspero himself had a pretty clear conclusion. He argued that because the Coptic community historically practiced monogamy and tended not to marry outside their community, they represent the most direct, the most unchanged lineage straight back to the ancient Egyptians. For him, they were like a living window into the Pharaonic past.
And this wasn't just Maspero's idea, not by a long shot. The lecture points to other, more modern scholars who see the same thing. You've got Dr. Zaki Muhammad Hassan, who said that about 4/5 of all Egyptians today, both Muslim and Christian, are originally of Coptic and therefore Pharaonic descent. And then there's Dr. Muhammad Hamad, who sees the same unbroken line in, of all things, architecture. He says Coptic architecture is just Pharaonic architecture wearing a different hat for a different time.
Okay, so let's tie this all together. The whole argument, when you boil it down, stands on 4 main pillars. First, the name. Copts just means Egyptian. Second, the numbers. The original population was never replaced, just added to in tiny amounts. Third, the faces. Archaeology shows a clear physical link. And fourth, the culture. The idea that the Copts represent the most direct preserved line to that Pharaonic legacy.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? We look at monuments like the pyramids and temples and think that's their legacy. But maybe this exploration suggests something else. Maybe history's most profound legacy isn't actually carved in stone. Maybe it lives on in the DNA, in the culture, and most of all in the faces of the people walking that same land today. What if the greatest monument they ever built was themselves?